Hey, this is Sabrina Monarch. I'm going to be speaking in this video to some big picture themes that are happening right now with the Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn in Pisces trine, and the grand water trines that we're forming in October and will be forming throughout November also. So let me show you real quick what I am speaking to. This is the chart of the moment here in Greece, and we have Jupiter at 24 degrees of Cancer. We have Saturn retrograde, 25 degrees of Pisces, close to Neptune at 29, also somewhat close to the North Node in Pisces. And then the last few weeks here in October, we had a Mercury and Mars conjunction in Scorpio, creating a grand water trine. And into November, the Sun will take that place in mid Scorpio, starting in mid-November. And then we will have, so look, we just go forward, next week, that water trine will be forming again. And as the month goes on, Venus will enter Scorpio, and into the later part of November, we will have Venus in Scorpio activating that grand water trine again. So we're often talking about astrology is like speaking of the water that we're swimming in, but this time it's really literal. The astrology is watery, which is to say it is emotional, right? It's emotional. And I'm going to be speaking around what you might be noticing, and hopefully this will open up a lot of expansion, insight, wisdom from what you've been processing and also what is coming. So if you're new here, welcome. Please subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so that you know when new videos come out, and definitely get on my mailing list. I have a free Pluto course I'll talk more about at the end of this video. At any rate, whoever's watching this, like this video right now, just do it and leave a comment at some point and say hello or tell me what you are taking away from this video. So let's speak to Jupiter and Saturn combinations. For one thing, though, before I get into that, I just want to say that a major topic that I'll be going over in this video is like existential philosophical morale, right? Like feeling the enthusiasm about your life, or conversely, feeling the frustrations and angst, the tensions, okay? And what we want to do is be really meta and philosophical about this right now, where if you are feeling emotionally frustrated, that is creative friction. And if we go from that creative frustration into hopelessness or victimization or despair, and we get depressed, then it's really difficult, right? And if when you watch movies or series, you might notice that especially at the beginning of the story, the protagonist is just kind of like hit by a number of circumstances that trigger some emotional tension that is going to have them have a character transformation throughout the story. The same is true in your life when things are kind of stirring and boiling and fermenting. And yes, we need to be tactical and kind of engage the story, but we also want to have an X-ray vision underneath it, which is my specialty as an astrologer and what I do in these kind of forecasts, but also in my personal one-to-one work with you, or when I teach you astrological literacy for yourself in my courses. We want to have that meta cognition about what is happening, what's the story, so that we can see the story and then wholeheartedly play it out. So it's an emotional time, right? We have these like emotional water trines. So that's kind of the stage I want to set initially, is that things are fermenting and stewing and boiling, and there's some frictions showing up. And they are generating the plot line of your life in this moment. So let's speak to Jupiter and Saturn when they come together, because they are holding this grand water trine together as the Scorpio planets activate the trine into a grand water trine. So Jupiter being the planet of expansion and education and worldview and direct spiritual experience, wisdom, travel, beneficent, but beneficent? I cannot say that word right now, but you know what I mean. It's a benefic planet. It's like yeah, I can't say the word right now. Saturn is a planet of contraction, limitation. It is also structure and bones, right? It is maturity. It is severe. It's like it sees what needs to get done, and it's cold. And it's the reality principle, right? And when Jupiter and Saturn, it's interesting. Something that I've really been noticing and reflecting, and I'm just putting this together now as I'm speaking, is that it requires, like, there's a wisdom, right? Like a philosophical wisdom that goes into understanding Saturn inherently, because reality is debatable, right? Like reality is, in some sense, it just is, but we are approximating reality in our interpretations of it. So even our understanding of cause and effect and how to live a good life and be a good person and live morally, right? Or do the right thing, like these are all worldviews, these are all belief systems. And right? Like someone could be raised to think that, they need to do what the Bible tells them to do, for example. And then partway through their life, they realize that that wasn't actually the path for them. That, they did the things that they were told to do by the religious authorities growing up, and turns out it wasn't their true path. Right? And this could be any kind of group that you're a part of that defines what is the right way to live. So, similarly, like whatever spiritual path you are earnestly on, you might have judgments or ideas of how you ought to behave or who you ought to be only partway through the story to realize that you're having a change of consciousness and you actually see the world differently, and you realize the error of some of your ways, right? That you had a strategy, you had some prediction errors, you thought that you were trying to accomplish one thing by being a certain way, and it turns out that you were creating, your own mess, and then you wake up outside of it, have wisdom, expand, and do life better. You learn from your failures, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what we're reassessing right now. And it's happening through the emotional body, right? So it could be when Jupiter and Saturn come together, it's also about culture making and world building. And through the emotional realm, it is acknowledging that your emotional life is consequential, that your continued choice to repress certain emotions has consequences, my friend, that it's not allowing you to be authentic in your relationships, for example, where it's creating some kind of sense of starvation emotionally in your relationships. Or, a huge part of society and culture and whatnot is like we have trauma, like intergenerational trauma. And until we actually work those things through internally, a lot of people that are into astrology and spiritual development are, those people that are like maybe trying to do things differently than what they've inherited from culture. But while you have stuck emotional pain inside of you that you don't resolve, you will continue to attract life experiences that hit those spots until it moves. So you can be triggered by your life into that work. And also internally, you can start to like open and clear some of those barriers and blocks that you have. Another Jupiter Saturn theme could be the limitations around optimism, right? Saturn coming in with the dark, rain cloud on, where we've been a hot air balloon, like where we've, been a lot of hot air, been all kind of like, yeah, it's just going to work out. And then it's like, but is it? Is this assumption that I have actually real? And we can also be, on the other hand, expanding past our cynicism and jadedness. So there's a little bit of a rubber band probably happening right now emotionally between the part of you that really believes things are going to work out and has faith, and the part of you that is bitter and jaded and crusty, And there's some negotiation happening between those two things, and possibly they're also working together. a lot of what I see in emotional healing, like a lot of emotional healing processes, go into feeling the hard stuff, like being with the density, being with the part of you that doesn't believe anymore, being with the part of you that's just tired, that, is given up, that has all this despair. And then that part like relaxes and softens when it's acknowledged. And then it kind of opens up and you feel your real essence come through again. And that part of you that believes. And if you had just tried to go straight to optimism and being happy and you ignored those dense, painful spots inside of yourself, you may have not been able to get there. And so, this is also something that people commonly misunderstand about the emotional realm, is the idea that your bad feelings are just going to feel bad forever. And because they're going to feel bad forever, you should lock them in a basement and never look at them, right? Like, because they're so terrible. And we actually, there's so things inside every person that they don't want to feel, right? And we build these personality structures and psychological defenses against parts of us that we feel we would just die if we felt those things. Unfortunately, a lot of the world is built around and centers around that kind of repression. And I think that a lot of cultural transformation that I'm personally interested in, for example, has to do with like, let's build the emotional skill sets to feel the stuff, like get to the bottom there, transform and alchemize. Can you feel my Pluto and Scorpio coming through and Pluto aspecting everything in my chart? Let's alchemize it and let's open up to being like really alive. So, emotional wisdom, world building through the emotions, and this kind of seesaw or this integration between density and depression, and like this feels so bad. There's all this despair and grief and heaviness, and like, wow, there's all this possibility. Life could be beautiful. I want to like open up to believing in the future and my dreams again, etc. Right? And the way that those things are like talking to each other right now. You feel me? Like, just pause here and even like pause this video and like write something in the comments. Yeah, about what is coming up for you around this. So, this is the main theme. I'm going to circle around it and explore different nuances and facets of the diamond of the moment, if you will, from here. And just a shout out, I'm really grateful. We had 30 people come through and say yes to astrological literacy, the Felt Sense School of Evolutionary Astrology. So now we're in session, but stay tuned for when this course opens up again. I also have new ways to work with me and current ways to work with me coming through, but I'm creating something, crafting something for new clients or people I haven't met yet to come through and have like a one session deep dive kind of experience and leave it at that, or perhaps do longer term work together, which is something that I really really love doing, is going on these longer processes, like moving through life material, moving through the emergent plot that comes up in these kind of containers. So I'm going to get back to the astrology. Recently, we had Mercury and Mars in Scorpio. They were conjunct. Mars is still in Scorpio at the time that I'm recording this. And then into November, we will have Venus enter Scorpio. So the story with this grand water trine began with some Mars activations. And I thought that period, so we're looking at kind of like late, mid-October. So like the last 2 weeks of October, maybe, there was kind of this, it was very triggering, right? Like Mercury and Mars together in Scorpio. It was like sharp. The messenger, was from the underworld, Scorpio. And so you may have noticed that people were saying things that triggered you, right? And that if you were looking at it from a psychological lens, because if you don't, you just project. You're like, that person's such a bitch, or like, I can't believe they brought up that topic at dinner. Like, how rude. Why did they say that? Like, you can totally project your discomfort onto the neutral messenger. Or you can be kind of more psychologically aware and pause in these moments and be like, wow, that person just said something kind of neutral, but it hit me, right? It struck an arrow in me, and it can change you, right? It can create transformation. So there was something alchemical happening. And in addition to that, I mean, Mars was really bringing in that sense of, okay, but now I need to do something. Uh, I'm emotionally triggered. Someone said something that really activated me. I'm feeling kind of moody and depressed, or like I have these desires that I don't believe they're possible. Like, okay, I like gotta do something. Like I gotta change. Like I think that theme has been up in the air. But let's thicken the plot a little bit because I do think that Saturn and Neptune in Pisces were bringing something kind of heavy, right? When Saturn and Neptune come together, they bring up tragedy vision, right? This kind of sense of like, why even bother? Like, everything's just kind of futile and hopeless anyway. Like, it's kind of like spiritual grunge. I'm seeing in my mind's eye like Dolly's melted clocks right now, also for some reason. That's just like a Saturn Neptune thing. But you know, when you kind of get in those fogs where just like even a sunset that's beautiful, you look at it and you're just like, ugh, like, and you just have some kind of weird, melodramatic, poetic thought about how like ugly and horrible life is, even though you're looking at like a beautiful sunset. Saturn Neptune does that. It's like something is kind of wrong in the water, is the vibe of it sometimes. And alternately, it's also really deep spiritual work and spiritual commitment. And so sometimes in those moments you might kind of wake up and be like, wait, I want to feel grateful. I want to feel my heart again. I want to feel close to God again. Right? So it can spark that like deeper commitment or devotion or like that spiritual grit. But you might go in and out. Like it's kind of like being lost at sea on a dark, stormy day, a little bit. And I do think that Saturn and Neptune and Pisces are also bringing in some subtle threads of to be or not to be, to exist or to perish, right? Like to not be here. And I don't mean it in a purely like I mean actually I kind of do. The like existential is life worth living thread. So take a breath with me, by the way. This is kind of taboo. We don't talk about this. And if you talk about it to your therapist, they have to report you, right? So there is kind of like a, we're in the social contract, and part of the social contract is that you continue to exist and you don't remove yourself from the whole thing. But privately, internally, there's a part of people that kind of can run this pattern of, is it even worth being here? And this is a Pisces thing because Pisces is connected to the other realms. I'm reading this book right now about the 5 personality patterns, and the very first one that there are these personality defenses for context, but one of them forms in pregnancy or like very early life where the soul is deciding if it wants to commit to being on earth or not. And for souls that don't feel that kind of clunk and that anchor of like, okay, I'm going to like really be here and do this earth thing, they can be very like spiritually connected and creative, but really kind of fragile about life things, like just having a hard time. People that have like some addiction issues or just are like, soft, sensitive creatures who are too good for this world. Just that kind of like, it's hard to be here feeling. Like the density, the earth plane, I don't think I want to do it. Like I would rather like leave and go up and out and dissociate, right? Dissociation is part of this pattern. And so people don't have to be actively considering leaving this life to have this thread active of like, is it worth being here? Right. And so we kind of like go through the motions and live in this kind of low level energy where like our pulse is kind of weak. You don't feel the kind of like fire in your bones or like the heat of your sex and desire or like the like raw, like, I'm an animal and I'm here feeling. Like it's a little bit more of like a faint, like I can hardly feel my pulse kind of thing. I don't want to get out of bed kind of thing. And when we actively have a sense of, I want to be here, or like, this part of us that's even making that decision of like, and this is also a very Piscean theme of like, should I like jump into the story and like do the thing? And like, I have tons of Pisces placements and I have literally, I'm a Pisces rising. I have worked hard to make it so that nurses can get my blood. Like I like visualize my blood coming out and like have trained my body to actually like be capable of doing that. I used to enter rooms and no one could hear me coming because I have such a light step. And so I found ways to like clunk into my body more, like a whole embodiment kinds of journeys. So yeah, that kind of like ethereal, and I work it. I have a ethereal kind of magic to me. But part of my own journey with being so Piscean has being like, okay, I'm going to like do this. I'm going to jump into life and like be here increasingly more and more and more. That's like my spiritual path in so many ways. Anyway, Pisces kind of has that like, I exist somewhere else and I don't know if I'm going to do this. I don't know if I'm going to come down here. And when this thread is activated in terms of your moodiness, right, or your discontent with life, we can have different parts of our life that we give this special Disney magical kind of privileged specialness to, where it's like, if my life is magical in these ways, or if I have these things that I really value, then I will be existentially okay, right? We're looking for a way to attach to life. And when Saturn Neptune is here in Pisces, it feels like there may be some attachment distress around things like money or lifestyle or romance and love and sex. Whatever it is that kind of has that like glamour to you, that is a place in your life that hasn't been reliably nourishing or reliably steady, and you have a lot of fantasy and dream and hope and longing and stuff around it, that can be the place that when you're getting signals that those things in your life are coming to fruition and they're possible, that you are like, okay, yeah, I'll do this, I'll live, I'll be here. And when you're getting the messaging that these things are going down the drain, that, like I was at a comedy open mic seeing my friend the other night. And it's just so funny. Like there was a lot of people joking about how the dating pool is a nightmare. There were women in the audience that were like, oh, like, don't even bother. And I hear this sentiment from a lot of people. And I've like had to take the Kool-Aid of the alchemy of that because it can trigger my scarcity fears of like, well, this thing that I really desire, maybe it's, so like that kind of where was it going with this? You can just be kind of jaded and be like, oh, whatever. It's not possible. Like what I what I want isn't possible. Like like that kind of vibe. And you can also be resisting that. You can be like so like like crying with a, if you're female, like dress like on a you're like on the riverbed or something and you're wearing like a white diaphanous dress and you're just like crying by the river, like, oh, like my dreams aren't coming true. Like, like this kind of different ways that we gravitate around big hopes and dreams, whatever the big dream is for you. And then the like, but like, it's not looking good. Like, it doesn't look possible, right? Which I don't think it's the point of discerning and securing from the outside environment if these things that we deeply desire are possible or not. It is jumping deeper into the internal alchemy that it's pointing out. Because if you have these places where you hinge ultimate meaning in life, you will tend to feel anxious and insecure. You will have dysfunctional attachment with life. Right? So that's also something that is just being worked out at the moment. But this is part of the rub right now. This is part of the drama of like where we have a big dream and if we don't think that dream is possible, or if we're clinging onto little signs of hope or something. So that's kind of the Saturn Neptune tragedy vision, or like, is life worth living? Or it's only worth living if I can like have my precious stuff, whatever the thing is, like that is happening as part of this grand water trine. I hope you like my little theatrics. I'm trying. So, spiritually speaking, the places that we project this kind of emotional intensity, they are pointing to, projecting emotional intensity onto particular circumstances. If I get the job, if I have the lifestyle, if I'm sexy, if I'm beautiful, if I have the partner, like all those things, which are very relevant and important to a lot of you, right? I have my spots as well. It matters, and we do have to resolve our relationship to it, right? Like we can have dysfunctional attachment to life over these things. And people that have a very strong appetite for the transcendent, for the magical, for the sublime, for God, we often have to reconcile that appetite with our 3D kind of lived experience of life. There is a learning arc on how to relate to those big dreams and to essentially the transcendent and to God and to the beyond, and also be here and be human, right? And ride the ebbs and flows and the ups and downs of life, and essentially be able to eat the fruit here, right? You don't have to starve yourself. You don't have to binge, but you can eat, right? This is a complex and nuanced integration. Like most people with this godly appetite don't want to be monks or nuns or homeless drug addicts. They want, in an integrated way, to have a nice home life, to have resources, to be loved and to love, and to be having the sex that they want to be having without losing their minds over it all. Right? People want to be aware, sensate, alive. And maybe this is my projection because I care about aliveness and being sensate and here. But I do think people generally want that. And it's not the dream to be numbed and checked out. That's just a coping, right? That is just a coping with the immensity of the hunger and the desire and like the complexity of being human. And it can form these personality structures that are a little bit jaded and crusty and then keep us starved from the things that we really, really desire. And then we're working to unwind that and take those masks off and all of that. So I think that as Mars and Scorpio came in to form a grand water trine here, it likely activated our strife, right? Like Mars and Scorpio is just like hitting the bullseye of like, how can I just upset you in the most perfect way that you're going to have a transformation, right? Like people My kind of people anyway, like people in the alchemy kind of world, like they love a good trigger, like they know how to work through it. It's like it's that spice of life, and it's like, ooh, that like made me feel something, and it like moved through my whole body, and I found the thing, I found the treasure, and I changed. We don't like to be triggered if we don't know how to do that kind of alchemical process. This is also something I help with one to one, just naming that, both with astrology, but also I do emotional freedom technique, which is an amazing somatic trauma healing technique to work with triggers more creatively. So Mars and Scorpio came up to activate our strife around all of these things about where we, are looking for optimism and like looking for a grounded, practical sense of hope. It also maybe gave us the will or the courage to kind of like put ourselves up to the task of like whatever the hero's journey is for us at this moment. Where we're feeling down and out emotionally and what we want to be feeling instead, how we might need to actively participate in that process. So I think another thread that I want to name, so just, yeah, we'll leave that one to simmer. But another thread I want to name is that something came up probably around sobriety and intoxication with the Pisces planets and also Saturn and Pisces. So Saturn being like restriction and auditing and kind of like it is a planet about sobriety and it's in the sign that is the most deep in the sauce, Pisces. Right? Pisces is like spiritual opening and transcendence, but it is also, it can relate to addiction. Same with Scorpio, can be kind of addiction stuff. And we've been going through a learning of our relationship to intoxication and to sobriety. So, just some examples people that, quit alcohol if they've been drinking for many years, even like whether they were functional alcoholics or dysfunctional alcoholics or what have you. Once they stop using that as a method to cope, then they just have a backlog of emotions to feel. So that is kind of, there's like a work to get sober. And there's also the work of being sober and like having this information available. I think also sometimes for others that are like highly sober, I think the languaging would be like, why am I raw dogging life? Right? Like people that just are like so sober and almost like rigid. And I don't mean it could be about substances, but it can also be about like people's relationship with sex or partying or just like living a little or having fun or whatnot. Where people can get into these patterns of like, I get up every morning and I like do my morning routine and I go to the gym and I eat healthy and I go to bed early and I wake up and I do the same thing. And like they will panic if that gets interrupted. And so for them, like going to a party and like getting drunk one night might be kind of transcendent or world opening in some way for them. And a lot of cultures actually have built in these rituals so that people can lose themselves, right? So that people can, in a supported, structured way, be intoxicated, right? That people can go on a trip. People can do plant medicine in a ceremonial way. And there's if we think of Saturn here, this could be like the elders or the structure that creates some lifeline or support or safety or facilitation inside of these deep, dark waters, which come with risk, right? Some people are psychonauts, some people are deep sea divers, and they have the internal architecture to be able to hold themselves. The mystic is swimming in the same waters that the psychotic drowns in, as you might know the quote. So these deep waters of Pisces have some risk, have some danger to them, and they're also part of our lives in the sense that no one wants to live in ordinary, mundane reality 100% of the time. So we play, we get into altered states, we go to the theater, we engage in the theater ourselves, like we play, we ritualize, we're in ceremony. We do things to break the monotony of the mundane. And I think that a lot of people are probably rebalancing right now their relationship to this. I had an interesting experience. I'm like, I went out to the comedy open mic and like, I don't really like alcohol that much. I don't drink that much. I'm very comfortable being alone and like doing my own thing. And I also like really crave to get like lost in a social, festival type environment or like to meet someone who I'm just like fucking fascinated by and I'm just like losing myself in conversation with them. I miss the parties from my grad school back when I lived in San Francisco. Like, I have my own hermity kind of ascetic Saturnian monk life, spiritualist life, and also the part of me that is, human. But yeah, it was just like I felt like a fish out of water at the bar. It was just like, I don't do this. Like, I'm literally so comfortable sharing like intimate details about my psycho mythic process on the internet, but like, what am I doing at this bar? This is so weird. And I felt so alive at the end of the night. And because for me, partying happens in moderation, I usually feel like so alive and I feel free afterwards. Like the things that bother me day to day that I know I'm trying to like let go of, once I lose myself in a pleasant experience, I'm like, oh yeah, this is who I am. Right. So sometimes we can like lose ourselves in the festival or lose ourselves in the party. This is like Dionysian medicine, right? And for people, finding this is Saturn because like Saturn is actually like in an early developmental way, it's like the part of you that learns how to, like, how would I put this? You kind of learn in your family if you're like an anal retentive person who's like rigid and always focused on the rules and like can't have any fun and you have to get to places on time and like la and you're like all like tight and stuff. Or you might grow up in a family where like everyone's late. They took too long to pick you up at school. Your family's dysfunctional. No one has it together and you don't feel like supported at all and it's like too loose and floppy. And so that balance between loose and floppy and tight and rigid is also a Saturnian thing. And it's also showing up about around our relationship to altered states and intoxication, which is not just through substance, but it's also through questions of like, people try to moderate this question with, quote, casual sex. It's hard for me to call it casual because if you're a very deep person, you probably aren't having casual sex. You might not be having sex that's for marriage, right? But this is another place where people can just be celibate for years and they're like, "Oh, I don't do that." Like I don't get involved in that. And then there's people that are like, at sex parties and stuff and they're like on the opposite side of like the exploration of it all. And that is another place where people are figuring out like how much of the fun, how much of the wild abandon do you want to be having, right? And how is it part of your everyday life? Because sometimes the lack of entering altered states or the lack of contacting the Dionysian creates a deep depression because it feels like your whole life is just about chop wood, carry water. And it's like, what's it all for? you know? And alternately, if that's all you do, you might feel very dysfunctional and scattered. And there's a lot of cultural judgments around the right way to do this thing. There's family judgments, and there's also your internal matrix of like how safe or unsafe you feel around play and things of this nature. Um, and some people, I would count myself in this category, like inside of peak experiences or altered states, like I go into trance states all the time with different practices, embodiment practices, and dance and whatever. It's like getting into trance and going into altered states and coming to life. Sometimes you get visions, and then you can seed those visions into how you live your life. And that can actually be the point of like a great work of art or theater or a ceremony, is that it expands you. And that expansion changes how you want to participate with your life, right? You have a vision and you turn it into an offering for your community. Or you have a vision and you turn it into a romantic gesture for your partner, right? Like your visions actually seed and find their way into your life. Versus also, another way that people play with these archetypes is that they have a rigid idea of what life is. This is how to be a person. This is how to be a husband. This is how to be a wife. This is how to be an employee. This is how to do it. And then this is so stressful that I need to go party on the weekend and like blow off some steam and then go right back into what I was doing before. And then you use intoxication or peak experience as a way to escape and release the pressure and then feed back into the system of the way that you're living your life. And for some people, that can be fine. They just kind of do that. That can also get depressing, right? Like there can be this kind of disconnect of where do I just get to actually be myself? And I think that that's part of maybe the argument of where Saturn shows up inside of intoxication and peak experience is that inside of having, you know, your elders or your ceremonial ritualists or your guides and whatnot, there's a way of entering into these expanded, altered states that you integrate into your daily life. That you're not using the altered states to just cope with a life that you don't like. So then enter Jupiter in Cancer, who I haven't talked about enough yet, but it is the planet of excess, right? And Jupiter in Cancer is like, all I've been talking about with Dionysus and the Dionysian and the party and the celebration and the fest, like that's all very Jupiter. We put it in Cancer, and it's also the wisdom of nourishment. It's a learning or discovery around what we need to feel at home with life and with ourselves in our story, right? That part of you that's just like I am satisfied. I belong. I'm nourished. And it's also the anguish or the internal battles leading us to discoveries around these things right now, especially with the grand water trine and the Scorpio stuff, like getting in there and alchemically triggering us, and the Pisces being like, but what's the point of it all, you know? It's like, it can actually be quite simple of like having some core needs met, right? That like philosophically, your view brightens when you just have enough calories, right? Or when you have the things that nourish you. And sorting out some ways where you actually do have power to make those things happen for yourself in places that you might be in pattern of helplessness when you actually can make a very pivotal move right now to nurture yourself. And that this is also a cultivation. This is something that you can do over time because it's your life. You know, it's not just like a 1, 2, 3 quick fix thing. It's like how you are honoring your vessel and nourishing your body. But I want to speak to something that there's a simple core human pattern that begins in infancy and lasting with us throughout our lives. And this is also inspired by the Big Five, like personality books by Kessler. But essentially, he's speaking about how we move through cycles of tension and soothing. Tension because something is awry, We need something, and soothing because the need has been met. That this happens with babies crying, right? And then being soothed. And that the way that babies express it is so visceral and loud and apparent. But I mean, watch it in yourself on a daily basis or watch it in someone that lives with you, of just seeing those cycles of tension and contraction and like, oh, I feel better. And we're just constantly in that kind of like expansion, contraction, tension, soothing. That's all we're doing, right? With Cancer, like Jupiter in Cancer is the wisdom of like, here's the accelerating plot drama of like all the tension, and here's how I come to a place of peace and wholeness, right? And how this happens in a bigger, broader, big picture existential sense. And it's like that life wisdom or the nourishment wisdom finding its way into where we're all kind of out of sorts and what kind of magically brings us into a more rounded out, peaceful state. So, to make it psychological, we don't find reliable regulation and soothing always in our early lives. Sometimes there were chronic problems, chronic stresses, or chronic lacks, and we developed these survival defenses beginning early in life from the trauma of not having our needs met. Then it becomes part of our personality and it becomes very psychological, kind of shadow work, Scorpio planets entering the Grand Water Trine territory to de-armor and unmask these strategies and find, our way into being present and available for life and for the moment instead of in these patterns or character structures. So I would venture to say that these grand water trines are very deeply dramatizing, not traumatizing, but dramatizing, adding theater and bigness and sensation and aliveness and hysterics even and waterworks and all those things to our emotional needs and the current limitations that we face in our consciousness around who we are and what we need and how we can fulfill those needs in an adult way. That's all. If we want to look at it more simply. And we'll miss out on the power of this time period if we freeze ourselves into opposition with the outside world or other people. With the outside world or other people being wrong, bad, insufficient, horrible, etc. And there's layers, right? You can be embroiled in conflict or you can be assessing and non-ideal world circumstances. But the deeper kind of spiritual alchemical power available in those experiences is to locate what's happening inside, right? Like your appetites, your hungers, your desires, your needs, and your willingness to change and to awaken in the process of having those needs and desires. Again, think about the movies that you like and how pretty soon at the beginning of the story, the main character, the protagonist, is hit with a variety of circumstantial factors or rising plot tension points that begin the story of their transformation. The same is happening in your life, right? Like when things are happening that start to stir your cauldron or start to kind of like, yeah, activate you emotionally, you can be annoyed and victimized by these things, or you can be really curious about what the deeper psycho-spiritual adventure of these things are. So, a few last pieces of advice, and then I will close us out. If you haven't liked this video already, do it. Just do it. And subscribe to my channel if you aren't. Leave a comment. Let me know what you're gleaning from this, like what you're taking away. I really would love to hear that. A few pieces of advice. One, there is a lot of power to be found in connecting with what you truly desire. And what does it take for you to relax and open around your desire? Because usually people's desires come with a lot of contraction or bracing or fear or resistance or sadness or like all sorts of other second and tertiary things that attach onto the desire. And I think it's really powerful to remember this, that like also inside of our energy centers, like our heart, and it can be a sexuality thing also, like the places where we feel these kinds of blocks, right? Like shame or disconnection or like guarding around the heart, things like this, that it keeps us kind of more behind these mechanisms. And desire is actually a really like galvanizing and kind of heating or alchemical force. And often when we introduce desire, or it gets introduced, like it just kind of comes our way or it emerges or something, or you go and you reflect and you feel into it and you let yourself feel it. When people touch their desire, they also touch like a whole like, you know, bramble thicket of thorns or, you know, guards and walls and stuff like this. And spiritually, the process of learning how to open internally and hold yourself inside of your appetite and desire and relax inside of it is a whole part of the magnetism. The external strategizing and the external seeking is part of being a social creature. It's like part of engaging the world. But if you really desire coherence and like real deep intimacy with life and with your, you know, true nature being expressed and all of that, you'll want to pay attention to how you dismantle your internal defensiveness around the deep, true, sensitive things inside. And where you get overly invested in manipulating the external world or trying to get things out here, or micromanage, you know, the external world with all this kind of guarding and stuff intact. Like, see what happens if you relax into how can you be in so much more approval and self-connection and self-intimacy with what's true inside and what you really want. This can be very big, cathartic. It can also be very subtle, where you just notice when you're being a little bit crusty during the day, right? Like if you're like, I don't like this situation and I don't like these people, and like, you know, and you're like complaining and you're just like, it's all like terrible out there. Like, I hate it all. When you're in that kind of mood, it's like, well, what would you like instead? Right? And if you tune into what you would like and you're like, that's not possible, you know, and you're like already allergic and like, you know, up in arms about it, then there's some disconnect there. Right. And so finding some more flexibility and ease and playfulness with like, you know, that would be really nice. I would love that. Right. And not like that, not triggering despair and anguish, to just acknowledge what you want. Powerful. Another thing is that if there's some circumstances in your life where the odds feel stacked against you and you feel weirdly pinned into a corner, that's scorpionic. And your plot line has some tension and drama. So I invite you to suspend the conditioning that something is wrong, right? Like inside of this, one part of you could be very collapsed and in this kind of like despair and hopelessness about the situation. And when that's happening, or if this is chronic, it is really helpful to have witness. You know, we can learn to stabilize this in ourselves, but it also happens with co-regulation with other people. Like, have this part of us held in a type of container Because the part of us that's collapsed and feels in despair and hopelessness about where we feel quartered by our life circumstances, that part of us needs a lot of love and care and nourishment and like what's the word? Like repair in some sense. It isn't the best driver. It's not the best leader. And when we have those parts of ourselves unconsciously driving, we are very limited, right? So like a whole part of shadow work is being able to see where parts of us hijack our personality or step into the driver's seat and make life choices for us. And so, you know, like I know this part of me in some sense, like I have the part of me that's like really capable and ambitious and like can do things. And I have other parts of me that are like super emotional and like fragile or something like that. And it is really powerful when those parts of me are getting activated to actually take some time to like take care of the activation and regulate and do the shadow work than to just shove that helpless part of me into a corner and like muscle through and push through and do the thing. Because you'll get very tired and you'll get very demoralized, right? So it's like having some greater kindness towards yourself where the reality is parts of you probably do feel completely collapsed and demoralized and like, I just can't do this. And like, this is way too hard. And those parts of you need something. And when they are constantly ignored and neglected, that is very stressful to your whole system and organization. And they will just get louder and they will try to take more power and more steer your ship even more because they are neglected, right? And it will happen in a kind of shadowy way. So just kind of considering that, like, the emotional waters are not like, they're not efficient in the same way that other parts of life are efficient, and try not to expect them to be. Like, sometimes you just have to sit down with parts of yourself that are kicking and screaming and take care of them. And yeah, for some reason, I really thought of this part getting activated in the sense of like where when circumstances show up and you feel kind of cornered and pinned to a spot, alchemy is available for you, right? And those are the places that, like, if an animal is, I mean, this is a really sad image, I'm sorry, but when an animal gets like trapped into a room, at some point they just stop fighting. They like really give up the will to like live or hunt. Even if you throw another animal, they'll just like sit there. So parts of us do get demoralized when they feel like they don't have any options or nowhere to go or something like that. And that might not actually be in certain circumstances what's actually happening. It's just a part of us that's neglected and we haven't cared for in a really long time. So if you're feeling emotionally pinned down or you feel like the odds are stacked against you in a particular spot or something like that, that could be a part of you that's ready for some kind of alchemy and probably needs a lot of care and another part of you or some kind of support to create the container for that part. For those of you that maybe don't know parts work, that might be a lot of jargon. So just allow what resonates to be there. I think all in all, with this grand water trine, that some internal reorganization is in order. Like our emotional world is kind of getting crunchy and it's moving through some kind of reorganization of like, we want to believe, we want to feel optimistic, we want to think that things are possible, we want to be excited about our lives. And there's also parts of us that are cynical, that are downtrodden, that are hurt, and they are talking to each other. And they don't need to battle each other to the death, right? Like they need to collaborate more. There's like resources that are being shared and exchanged between these parts. It's like a simple thing like people that do deep emotional transformative work, the vibe where it's like you really go into like the fucking underworld and you're just like really in it and things are hard and you're like really moving something dense. And then life is so like much more pleasurable after that, that you like open your capacity for real gratitude and enjoyment. So when we have parts of us that are like really optimistic and happy and like, I'm up here high vibing and don't do anything to ruin my vibe, like those parts, if they can't also integrate with your soil and with your density and with your personal underworld, you have an internal disconnect. And these parts, like your optimistic, happy part and your like deep, golem underworld parts, like they all can come into harmony within your own system, truly. But we do have to kind of find our inner organization and like our inner collaboration and our ability, our range, our bandwidth, our capacity to be with these emotional nooks and crannies and like emotional spots that we'd rather, not acknowledge that they exist and whatnot. And for people, people can be like, this is too complex. I don't want to deal with it. I'm going to just go have a drink. I'm going to like ignore, the whole thing. So it's also that kind of like internal commitment of, can you sit with yourself? Can you be with yourself? Can you find the support that helps you be with yourself? Do you have gifts that it's time for you to share, with the world and with your community? Because sometimes we're in need, and other times we also have things to offer. So just a lot of reorganization internally around how we're dealing with these, emotional morale themes, and then how we're also participating creatively in the world with it. And so I'm going to leave us at that and invite you, if you want spiritual, philosophical, astrological, integrated support, come work with me. Sign up for my mailing list. If you go to my website, sabrinamonarch.com, I'll also link it below. I have a mailing list. I have a free Pluto course if you want to learn about Pluto, which is the planet that I really start with when it comes to giving astrology readings because of my lineage with EA, evolutionary astrology. But I have a new session offering that I'm going to be sharing soon here for new clients, or maybe people that I just haven't sat with in a while. I will be sharing more about that to my mailing list soon. So that's going to be the best place to be in the know about it. I also do have availability for my Oracle body coaching, and that's coaching that combines sexological intimacy coaching, astrology, and EFT, emotional freedom technique. So I'll also leave the link for Oracle body to learn more about that in the notes. But if you resonate with my forecasts and you feel something, and if you're not sure what the path might be with working together, this new session that I'm offering, that's going to be like a deep dive, like understanding something at a more broad level, bringing some material about what's moving for you. That can be a space for just us to do some kind of deep dive, but also speak about what path there may be for working together deeper if you're looking for more deeper or longer term support. So I'm going to be sharing these things to my mailing list. It's here kind of stirring and forming in the background. I just was launching the Felt Sense School, and I'm creating content for that. So this is the next kind of seed that I was feeling about inviting you into work together and, supporting you in your process around not just what your chart says, but how you're like alchemizing the things that are happening in your life real time. So my mailing list is the best way to hear about that. If you're here and you've watched all the way through these announcements, just to ask again to share in the comments what's resonating with you, what you're taking away from this we traveled to a lot of places today around kind of our emotional well-being and how this integrates to how we're living our life. So I imagine that this could stir some very deep contemplations or reflections. And I would really love to hear anything that you'd like to share about what's moved for you, what you're taking away, what moved you here, and then any personal shares if there's certain things that hit or opened up that you want to reflect and name here. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again soon.